Muslim women in Tunisia can now marry non-Muslim men. The president has overturned a ban that's lasted more than 40 years. Clerics say the controversial decision violates Islamic law. But how far does it go in closing the gender equality gap? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. It is the announcement that's polarising a nation. Tunisia has overturned a ban on women from marrying non-Muslim men, a law that's been in place for more than 40 years. The move has sparked heated debate on the streets and on social media. Human rights groups say that it's a landmark move in guaranteeing women's freedom in the country. Traditionalists, though, are denouncing the proposal as a violation of Islamic law. Hashim Al-Bara reports.
This is Tunisian President Baji Qaid Essebsi attending a gathering to commemorate National Women's Day. Essebsi said he was committed to lifting a decades-long ban on women marrying non-Muslims. On Thursday, he fulfilled that promise and overturned a 1973 law paving the way for women to choose whomever they want to marry, regardless of their partner's religion. The decision is unprecedented in the Muslim world.
Gender equality has been enshrined in the Constitution, but when we call for equality, that doesn't mean we are against religion. Our Constitution stipulates we are a secular state, but our people are predominantly Muslim.
Although Tunisia is the most progressive country in the region, conservatives have gained ground since the 2011 revolution. Clerics have stepped into the fray, criticizing the president for what they consider to be a violation of Islamic law. Rights groups hail the decision as a landmark victory for women, but insist women have a long way to go to get full rights. For months, there have been protests to ensure equal inheritance rights for women. Under local laws, women can only get half the inheritance of what men receive. A decision on reforming the inheritance laws has been met with strong opposition from religious leaders. The president insists he is determined to strengthen women's rights and freedoms, but many are worried Tunisia could see more confrontations between those who support a secular state and those who do not. Hashim Al-Bara, Al Jazeera.
Well, prior to the revoking of this law, a non-Muslim man who wished to marry a Tunisian Muslim woman had to convert to Islam and submit a certificate of his conversion as proof. Under Islamic law, Muslim men can marry non-Muslim women. The decision now to overturn the ban for women is seen as a milestone in a region where religion in marital ties can be at the heart of a family feud and long struggles against state laws. However, women in Tunisia still face discrimination, particularly in matters of inheritance, which prioritizes sons over daughters. All right, let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. Joining us from Tunis is Amna Guellali, Director of Human Rights Watch in Tunisia. From Washington, D.C., Qasim Rashid, who's an advocate of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in America. And joining us also from Tunis, lawyer Riadh Guerfali. Welcome to Inside Story, all of you. Amna, let's start with you. Despite criticism from the region's religious leaders and scholars, this move to allow Tunisian women to marry outside their faith has been hailed by many as progressive and revolutionary. Is it?
It's definitely a very positive step for women's rights. It's a step that was preceded by several other, progressive legislations that were enacted recently, such as a law on violence against women that is meant to prevent all sorts of domestic violence. And I think it's a really very symbolic move from the Tunisian government to rescind this decree, this ministerial decree from 1973 that encroached on many of the principles for which Tunisian women fought and for which the Tunisian people fought as well. such as the principle of equality. This decree installed some kind of discrimination between men and women by prohibiting only women from marrying outside of their faith, for marrying non-Muslim men. And it also encroached on several other very important principles, such as freedom of conscience, because it interfered with faith and interfered with the inner, beliefs of the people, and also encroached on the principle of the right to privacy. So it's a very interesting, very important move, and very important that Tunisia has taken this courageous step.
All right, so what are we to make of the criticism? Qasim, Rashid, is this move in violation of Islamic law, as some have claimed?
Well, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community seeks to represent the revival of true Islam. And one of the tenets of Islam that the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, taught was a separation of religion and state. So I think you can argue that while Islam teaches that Muslim women should marry Muslim men, the idea that you can enforce that or force that upon women is something completely contrary to Islamic teachings. In a recent lecture, the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, His Holiness the Khalifa of Islam, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, made explicitly clear that in Islam, men and women are absolute equals, and there's no doubt about this. So for those who believe that Muslim women should only marry Muslim men, then they have the right to hold that personal belief as part of their faith. And as a Muslim, I believe that's what Islam teaches. But Islam is also crystal clear that you cannot enforce religious teachings. You cannot enforce morality on people, or your definition of morality. The Quran also says in chapter 4, verse 19, that do not inherit women against their will. So whereas you can have your understanding of Islam, you have no right to enforce that understanding on people. People should be afforded, as my colleague, the lawyer, just said, that they should be afforded religious freedom, freedom of conscience. And if your understanding of morality truly is a better understanding, then it should speak on the merits. You shouldn't need a law forcing people on who they can and what people of what faith they can and cannot marry.
All right, Riadh Guerfali in Tunis, what do you make of that? Tunisia's former Prime Minister said that the president's ideas don't take into account the views of all Tunisians, just a liberal segment of the population. Is he right?
First of all, I want to say that we just right now start to talk about the religion and a religious issue. In my mind, it's not about religious issue. It's about fundamental rights. I mean, I respect what the last guest was saying about religion, but I mean, as a Tunisian citizen, not for him or especially, but I don't. I mean, a lot of Tunisian. I'm one among them. I don't care about what people think about Islam or the way they read or understand Islam. I mean, it's about my faith. I mean, I don't want to allow anybody to discuss what I believe. I don't want to allow anybody to tell me what is right, what is wrong in the public sphere. First, second, I mean, it's as I mentioned, it's not a religious issue. It's about fundamental rights and their scope. And what I mean about fundamental rights, the first one, I mean, I'm absolutely free to do whatever I want with the fruits of my labor, with my money and my possessions. I mean, I don't want to allow anybody to tell me what I do with them or not. Second, in the Tunisian constitution, there is the freedom of faith. So what is my faith, what are my beliefs, and how I interpret my religion, whether it is the Islamic religion or another one, that's my business. That's my own business. I mean, as a Tunisian citizen, like many other, I don't want to discuss religious issues. I don't want to discuss interpretations. I want to discuss only two things, which are, as I mentioned, my fundamental rights to do whatever I want with the fruits of my labor and my possessions, and my freedom of faith.
But Riadh, are you one of the liberals that the former Prime Minister is talking about here? Are there others within Tunisian society who would fundamentally disagree with you?
The problem, I mean, what I agree with, of course, I agree with anything that goes in the direction of fundamental rights. But in my mind, the problem of the First Minister and the President of the Republic is the way they presented the thing. Because, I repeat it, in Tunisia already, the legal framework guarantee the freedom of faith, and second, guarantee the fundamental rights that people do what they want with their possessions, as long as they don't trouble the public order, of course. But I mean, the legal framework already allow lots of things. So I mean, I think in my mind, it's a very bad direction to talk about religion. Or no, it's really it's about the scope, about the existing legal framework.
Okay.
Is it effective or not when we talk about freedom of faith?
Amna Guellali in Tunis. President Essebsi says, we're confident that Tunisian legislators will be able to strike a balance between gender equality on the one hand and religion and the constitution on the other. Are you confident that they can?
I mean, I would agree with my colleague saying that, you know, like the discussion about the religious framework and you know, like the interpretation of the Quran and interpretation of the fundamental scriptures is somehow misleading, because then we are trapped in all kind of different interpretations, because the interpretation of the modernists, those who want to have a modern interpretation of Islam that gets away with all the, you know, very problematic, you know, provisions in the Islamic Sharia, would be faced by others who want a very orthodox interpretation and who would fight for it and who would consider that the interpretation of the modernists are completely alien to what the Quran says and what, you know, 1400 years of practice of the Islamic Sharia has produced. So my tendency is, while understanding that there should be some kind of, you know, interpretation and some kind of dialogue on the interpretation of the religious scriptures, we shouldn't be trapped in that, and we should really, especially like for legislators, for policymakers, they should take the courage of saying, you know, we are in a secular country, we are in a country that has removed or has never really enshrined Islamic law in its legislation. We are thinking about what is the best for the community we have in Tunisia in terms of their rights, their fundamental rights, but also all kind of other issues such as the economy, such as all this debate takes place outside of the religion.
Okay.
And so it's important that legislators and policymakers really, you know, set the line. Of course, there is debate in Tunisia, there is disagreement. And the disagreement will be very, very, you know, heightened and very tense when it will come to discussing the issue of inheritance law, because this would require a change in the legislation. It would require a reform of the Code of Personal Status. And of course, there are different streams and different, you know, categories or parties in the Tunisian parliament that wouldn't like, they don't want to have a reform of this kind of getting away with all the discriminatory provisions of the personal status code, such as discrimination in inheritance. But still, I think the debate is really very important.
Okay.
And there are ways to overcome some of the, you know, reluctances and some of the resistances that exist in the conservative constituencies.
Okay, I want to come on to the issue of inheritance that you raised in just a few moments. But first, Qasim, President Essebsi argues that Tunisia needs to fight discrimination and to modernize. I just wonder, is it possible to shape or reinterpret ancient Islamic laws to modern day societies and our current way of life?
Yeah, I don't think there's a need to necessarily reinterpret. I think there's a need for a revival of what Islam actually teaches. And this is one of the fundamental issues that we see throughout the Muslim world, not just in Tunisia. There's a fundamental failure of Muslim leadership in both in Islamic scholarship and in how to apply Islam to your personal life while respecting the lives of others. You have numerous Muslim majority countries. Tunisia is not one of them, but you have numerous, like Saudi Arabia, like Pakistan, that are mixing religion and state. They have things that are alien to Islam, like blasphemy laws, apostasy laws, and they try to label them as Islamic. And what happens is that not only do you radicalize youth and you create these tensions that are completely unnecessary, you also muddle up and you confuse people on what Islam actually teaches and what a secular governance society under a Muslim society can actually look like. If we look at the example that the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, actually established in the Charter of Medina, this was a secular constitution where Muslims and Jews lived as equal citizens of one state. And no person was held accountable to Islamic law unless they were a Muslim who willingly wanted to be held to an Islamic law. You did not have a situation where Jews were forced to adhere to Islamic law. And I think this fundamental principle is lost upon Muslim leadership. And you have environments where people are asking these questions, where do we need to reinterpret Islamic law? When no, you don't. You simply need to recognize this fundamental basic fact that Islam teaches secular governance. It teaches your private faith should remain private and you can believe whatever it is you want to believe as long as you're not hurting anybody else. But the government itself should be based on absolute justice and consultation. These are the two fundamental pillars of an Islamic government.
Okay.
The Khalifa of Islam, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, has been advocating that for governments in the Muslim world to counter extremism and radicalization, they need to go back to this principle of upholding absolute justice. Until we do that, we'll have 1,000 different interpretations of Islamic law and they'll all be useless. But if we focus on justice, then we can actually get somewhere as a society.
And yet some of Tunisia's leading imams and theologians have denounced the plans, particularly on inheritance, as a flagrant violation of the precepts of Islam. So who's right, you or them?
Well, I mean, let's even assume that they're right, that it is a violation of what Islam teaches on inheritance. That's irrelevant to the fact that you cannot enforce Islamic moral teachings on people who don't want them enforced. I mean, there's not a single example in the life of the Prophet of Islam or in the Quran where people were forced to follow Islam. And so to claim that you are upholding Islamic values by forcing people to follow Islam is perhaps the biggest argument to show that what you're doing is completely un-Islamic. So I will concede to these scholars and clerics that yes, Islam has a very specific inheritance law, but where they have absolutely no ground whatsoever is to say that we can enforce this inheritance law on somebody else. And I'll close with this as well. What the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has done in 200 nations worldwide is spread peacefully, recognized separation of religion and state, and upheld Islamic values for millions and millions of Muslims without a single act of compulsion or terrorism. That is the Islam that I invite the world to look at, not this fake conflict between religion and state, because there should be none. Religion and state, according to the Prophet of Islam, must remain separate, where people can worship freely without oppression, and the government rules based on justice, not by forcing people what to believe or what not to believe.
Okay, Riadh Guerfali, what do you make of what you've just heard there? To what extent do Tunisia's president's proposals, particularly on marriage and inheritance, but on equality overall, give new impetus to moderate Islam, the kind of Islam we were hearing about there, and the argument that Islamic law perhaps is or could be open to interpretation and evolution, or that there should be a separation of Islam and the state?
First, I think there's this question, the question you just asked right now, is a question that we hear very, very often. But I think it's a relevant question because we are talking about, when I say modern state, a new state, État-nation nouveau, I mean the current legal framework doesn't exist because it is from the Sharia. It does exist because it is the law that is validated by the state. I mean, we're not in the ancient framework where, I mean, you have the Sharia hierarchy of the norm. I mean, what is applied in Tunisia today, it's not because it is in the religion, but it is applied because it is validated by the state. We're talking a state where the principle of of the autonomy of the legislature is also a fundamental rule in Tunisia. I mean, I appreciate lots of what had been said by by your guest, the last one who talked. I mean, lots of very reasonable argument, but where I do absolutely not agree is that we are justifying the modern law, the modern state, the modern democracy by religious arguments. I appreciate very much what he said about the Sahifa. Indeed, the Sahifa, I mean, created what we can say today even a secular state. I mean, the Prophet was the head of state not because he's prophet, but because his power was validated by a lot of tribes, Jewish, Muslim, etc. But what does disturb me here is that we are building an argumentation that is based on religious argument. And I mean, when I said the question is a bit irrelevant.
Hang on a second.
One more time.
Riadh, wait a minute. Yes, please come in, Qasim.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but my argument isn't a religious argument. What I'm saying is, if you look at the secular history of Islamic history, even if you want to try to make a religious argument, the example the Prophet gave was still a secular example. He still separated religion and state. So there's really no example from the life of the Prophet of Islam that you can point to, or that anyone can point to say, here the Prophet enforced Islamic law, and that is why we must enforce it today.
Okay.
On the contrary, when he had power, when he had political power, he refused to enforce Islamic law, and he kept religion and state separate. That is the model that we should follow today.
Okay, Riadh, a quick response from you, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, very quickly, just one more time. I mean, what the point that I raised, the point that I do emphasize very much on it. I mean, we build the Tunisian laws. I mean, they are applicable because, one more time, they are validated by a parliament, and the parliament has the autonomy, his autonomy. I mean, when Tunisians go and they elect their deputy, they do it. I mean, to respect their will. I mean,
Okay.
and therefore, I mean, we can't impose to the legislature any kind
Okay.
of interpretation.
Amna, we've got about
Can I
a
just
minute
make
before
a
the end of the
comment?
programme. I know you want to come in, but I also want to know that
Yeah.
we're talking here about Tunisia's constitution, which seems to be at odds with Quranic teachings. Will that cause division and the potential for trouble for Tunisia?
I just want to, get away from the religious argument, as my the other guest said, and go back to politics, because we are talking about politics here. The decision of the government to rescind and abrogate this 1973 decree, ministerial decree banning the marriage of Muslim women with non-Muslim men is a political decision. And it's about political players who are trying to, place themselves in the landscape and place themselves in the political game. So just, focusing on the religious aspect of things will not help us and help also the viewer to understand what is at play. Because you have to understand also that this decision to rescind the decree came on the heels of another very bad decision the previous day, which was the decision to, amnesty corrupt people, corrupt state officials from any wrongdoing, etc. So it's a political game,
Yes.
and it's part of also of this, state feminism in which, women's rights were also all the time instrumentalized in order to, win scores and in order to do politics.
Okay,
So,
Anna,
of course, the religious
I'm sorry
aspect
to interrupt
of it is
you,
important,
Anna, but
but
we
it's
are.
not the only thing.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're out of time on today's programme. We did want to hear a voice that was opposed to Tunisia's plans, and we reached out to several people today. All of our invitations to appear on the programme were declined. Many thanks to all of you, Amna Guellali, Qasim Rashid, and Riadh Guerfali. Thank you for watching the programme. Don't forget you can see Inside Story again at any time just by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us on our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join us on Twitter, our handle @AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian, Finighan, and the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.